Good morning, good morning. Boy, it's a cold day in Alabama. But boy, I missed my garden so much. I missed my garden. I'm up moving around from my last day here. My surgery is at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I can't wait. I'll be honest, I'm excited about it. I'm like a kid before Christmas here. I cannot wait. One, I haven't slept in a whole week while I've been waiting for this thing. It's been a tough week. I haven't slept well at all, so honestly, I'm looking forward to the nap. Knock me out. I don't care at this moment. I hate to be that way, but oh man, it's been a it's been a rough week, and I don't do well with meds. I don't take pain. I don't like taking meds, so it's just been a rough week. Anyway, I'm not complaining. I'm explaining, and I'm out here doing some last watering today, and then my wife will take it over for a few days, I guess. They say they're going to keep me at least for a few days, and then I'll be up moving about. I'll be honest, if this doesn't hurt hardly near as bad as what it does before the surgery, oh, I'll be jumping all over the place. I'll be so happy about this. I really expect this to go really, really well, and I'll be up moving about very, 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 very quickly. So, and out of pain hopefully too. So, anyway, I'm doing some last minute watering, and all I'm doing today is I'm going to mix up some water, and I'm going to mix up some CalMag again. I'll be honest, if there was one thing I'm looking back on and going to change for the upcoming year, it's probably going to be my nutrient. Obviously, because I don't have a nutrient mix really, but I'm mixing my own as I kind of go along, and I may not change that. I really like what I'm doing right now, and I like the response I'm getting with the plants, and it's teaching me so much. Just being able to watch the plants' response. If you're feeding the same thing to them every day, the same mix, you get growth and everything, but not the same kind of growth as when you're mixing separate nutrients, and you can see how they actually respond to the individual nutrients. It's quite eye-opening sometimes. Anyway, because of that, one of the things I'm changing is calcium. Without a doubt, calcium. I'm using a lot of CalMag. I'm not trying to support the product or promote the product. I'm using a lot of it because I love it. I think it works great. I use it with all my plants, all the house plants. I've always given it to my house plants and outdoor plants. These products are designed, and this is one of my viewers. Again, I have great viewers. They ask great questions. One of my viewers asked the other day, said, the manufacturer says a teaspoon per gallon of this, it gives me around 825, I think, parts per million, 850 parts per million, something like that. And you're telling people 40, 50 parts per million. What's with that? Great question, great question. And she's correct. These are designed for your garden. These are designed for tomatoes, vegetables, flowers, your yard, house plants, anything that you grow in soil, and also hydroponically. These are not just hydroponic nutrients, these are also soil nutrients. Cannabis, marijuana, those are very, very popular with this. It's one of the issues with trying to find information on these products. Whenever you Google them or go on the internet, that's all you find is a lot of this is on cannabis or marijuana growing. But if you grow tomatoes, and everybody who's grown tomatoes knows blossom end rot, very, very common in tomatoes. Very, very common, especially if you're growing a lot of tomatoes, big tomatoes. It's calcium deficiency. Teaspoon per gallon, like this recommends, is just about perfect for taking care of that issue or preventing it or getting it to go away. Orchids, they don't feed anything like a tomato or pepper plants or your trees in your yard or your house plants. Nothing like that. They're a little bit different. Anyway, in nature, 25 parts per million is what the runoff on trees typically is. That's where I got the 40, 50 parts per million. It's basically just low amounts. And I was doing 40 or 50 parts per million once a month. Every 4 or 5 times I fed, I was giving them calcium or CalMag, 40, 50 parts per million. I have to admit, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm doing what I'm doing right now, same thing, I'm using CalMag, but I'm adding a little bit all the time. I'm giving my orchids a tiny bit of calcium all the time, like they would normally get in a tree or in the wild. Even if I'm not mixing nutrients, I'm adding anywhere from 10 to 15 parts per million in my water of calcium or CalMag is what I'm using. And I'm talking about CalMag, not calcium nitrate today, CalMag. Calcium nitrate, you have to get the pH down to around 5.8, get it closer to the sweet spot. You also have to watch what you mix it with because it can become toxic and create issues like that. CalMag, which is calcium carbonate, just like what you get out of your tap water, calcium carbonate is different. And I'll talk about that in just a second because I think a lot of people are making a mistake there too. If I'm mixing nutrients together, I use CalMag also and mix it with my nutrients, as long as there's not calcium already in the mix. If the mix already has calcium in it, I would never add something else to it. And I'm very cautious about even mixing it with nutrients that don't have calcium in them. Be cautious about what you mix to. Only try it on a couple of plants if you're not sure, but just be careful. Calcium carbonate like this right here typically isn't going to be the issue. And this is chelated also. If I'm mixing this with my nutrients, 10% of the mix or less is what I will make the CalMag. And I normally feed 125 to 150 parts per million. So if I'm feeding 150 parts per million, 15 parts per million or less is CalMag. If I'm feeding 200 parts per million, 20 or less is CalMag. Do you follow? I hope that's clear. And that's all I'm doing. But even if I'm not giving nutrients and it's just rainwater, just water in a big container to soak them in just to hydrate them, I'm adding tiny little bits of calcium. 12 to 15 parts per million of calcium to the total amount of that water. So it gets up to about that range, which is very, very light, very, very tiny amounts, just traces. But that's just how I'm doing it. And where am I getting the 10%? The Peters Excel fertilizers, the MSU fertilizers, those are anywhere from 4 to 8% calcium, not including the magnesium. So when you start adding it all up, what I'm following is really close to what they're doing. Maybe a tiny little bit more calcium, but really close to what they're using. And it shows. The results are just phenomenal. What I'm seeing is really, really remarkable. I'm not saying run out, get calcium, give it to your plants, and expect rapid growth. There's temperatures, a lot of lights here, things like that. That all takes it into effect. But if you give them artificial sunlight, or you're giving them sunlight, you're giving them warmth, you're giving them temperatures, you're giving them humidity, all the right conditions to grow, and the plant wants to grow. If it doesn't have calcium, it won't grow. Or, which is one of the signs of calcium deficiency, is that new shoot will grow and then turn yellow, turn black, and die off and die back. Dieback is a typical sign of calcium deficiency. One of the things you have to remind yourself, and that's one of the things that made me start feeding differently, is thinking about the calcium. It's not just the new growths that are affected by calcium. Every part of the plant, every single piece of the plant, every piece and part of the plant has to have calcium. Every new shoot, yes, but every new growth doesn't just mean new shoots or new growths for the plant, like these two big canes coming up here, which would require a lot of calcium. It's every new leaf, every stem, blossom, every root, every single millimeter of root requires calcium to build up cell structure to build up and create. So that's a lot of calcium when you look at it. And are you giving your plants enough calcium? My plants were growing well to begin with. They had good root growth, and they had nice shoots coming up, and they weren't dying back. But when I started adding calcium just a little tiny bit all the time, I noticed a lot more root growth. And instead of getting 1 or 2 shoots, I'm getting 3 and 4 shoots on some of my plants. And the shoots seem to be a lot larger. They're outgrowing the original plant. They're getting bigger than the original plant. I'm not seeing any negative effects at all whatsoever by giving some additional calcium or feeding calcium all the time. So one of the other things I was thinking about, and this I think is real important, it's one of those other, I think, things that gets overlooked, myself included. I have to remind myself of it. When a plant has a new growth started, if it needs nitrogen, it can borrow it from another part of the plant. That part, an older part of the plant, will turn yellow, die off. It's called senescence. It'll transfer that nitrogen, because nitrogen is a mobile nutrient. It'll transfer that nitrogen over to the new growth, and the new growth will grow. If that plant wants to grow a new flower spike that needs phosphorus and potassium, it can recycle an old flower spike, which orchids do. We know that for a fact. And it can send that phosphorus and potassium to the new growth or to the new flower spike if that's where it needs it to grow, or to the new growth, or to the new roots, or wherever it wants the potassium. N, P, and K being mobile nutrients, that's how they work in a plant. That's how a plant uses them. It transfers them from one part of itself to another part of itself, usually for new growth. I'm going to sit down here for a second. The part I have to remind myself about calcium is it's not mobile nutrient. It's an immobile nutrient. A plant doesn't have the ability to take calcium and transfer it from one section of itself to another. So in order for it to stack this up, and you have to think of calcium like if you're trying to stack up a bunch of balloons, it's hard to stack them up. But if you took each balloon and were able to put it inside a little box, the calcium being the little box, you can start to stack them up if you see, crude visualization, but you understand what I'm saying. The cell wall structure in these new shoots, new roots, etc., are all the same way. It takes a lot of calcium. Every cell wall structure requires a tiny little bit of calcium, so that has to have a lot of calcium all the time, exposure to it, some type of reserve so it has access to it, and it has to be in a soluble form. All right, calcium carbonate isn't water soluble like calcium nitrate is. Calcium carbonate is what you get out of your tap water. It's not water soluble. You can't absorb the calcium from it. We can't absorb the calcium from it when we drink it and it hits our stomach acid. It's broke down, the molecular bond is broken, and then we can absorb the calcium from it. But reactions have to occur. You can't just absorb it, and the plants don't have that ability to break things down quite like that. After a while, after they have a large root mass and an established root system, and in a pot and stuff, some bacteria is there to do some of that breakdown possibly, but typically not enough. In wild on a tree, they would have access to a continual supply of calcium and other nutrients from the tree itself running down and from other locations. Here, we're kind of confining ourselves to one little spot. We're not attached to a large tree or anything. We have to provide everything for them, and I think that requires a lot of calcium for the orchids. I think that's one of those missing pieces of the puzzle for orchid growth. I really, really do. I'm realizing, I think so anyway. Again, these are just my opinions, but it's funny how anytime I talk to somebody who has grown orchids for a long time, and sometimes I hear other growers make the comment that I was talking to an old grower at a show the other day, and he swears up and down the secret to orchids is calcium. You hear that all the time, and nobody really pays attention to it, but I'm paying attention to it. I'm trying to be a grower, an observant grower, and really pay attention to what my plants are telling me. And I think without a doubt they're telling me a little bit of calcium all the time. So that's what I'm doing. Now this is calcium carbonate, just like you get out of your faucet, but which is not absorbable. However, in these products, and other people and myself have mentioned before, that is chelated. Chelated means it's bound to typically a mineral or a metal like aluminum, or in this case iron is chelated with iron, which the molecular bond has been broken, so the calcium is more easily absorbed. It's soluble at this point, and it's also, because it's attached to the iron, it's more absorbable at a wider pH range. So you don't have to get your pH down to 5.8. You can feed it in the low to mid 6s like orchids like, and it'll absorb just fine, and it'll absorb calcium in a soluble form too. That's why this works, and it's calcium carbonate versus the tap water. And I don't want to get into a big argument or fight over tap water. It works. I'm not saying it doesn't work, but it doesn't provide a lot of calcium in it. It doesn't provide it in a soluble form, and that's where I think a lot of people make a mistake. I don't recommend using tap water unless it's very, very low parts per million. And if it's very, very low parts per million, it's close to like RO water. It doesn't have a whole lot in it. And if you're using RO water or rainwater or anything like that, you need to use a mix that has calcium in it, or you need to be providing calcium in another form. This is a great product to do it. And I'm not just trying to promote this product. I use a lot of it, and I'm finding out that I use a lot of it all the time. Or I'm using a tiny bit of it all the time. So anyway, I've got to get watering. I've got lots to do, busy day, and I'll be off for a couple of days. So thanks again for all the wonderful messages, all the great comments, sentiments, prayers, just kind thoughts, words. I really appreciate all that. It means the world to me. It means the world to me. And I'll be back in a few days, and everything will be fine. Thanks again for watching, and get out there and work in your garden.